I want to read you something that Bill Wiese describes in his book, 23 Minutes in Hell, some of the torment. Now, he goes into greater detail, but let me just read you some of the torture and torment, because if I don't share this with you, you'll never get your grip or your mind around the fact of how terrible this place was. Now, this is his story of when he first appeared. He said this: "As I was laying there on the floor of the cell, I felt extremely weak." Now, this man I'm reading you about, he went to hell for 23 minutes. We've had him on the podcast. He's a friend of mine. He is the real deal. If you've ever met the real deal, God brought him there and said, "I want you to go warn my people about hell." But this is what he says: "As I was laying on the floor of the cell, I felt extremely weak. I noticed that I had a body, one that had appeared just as my body appears now. Lifting up my head, I began to look around, and immediately I realized that I was not by myself in this cell. I saw two enormous creatures unlike anything I'd ever seen before. These creatures were approximately 10 to 13 feet tall, and this is graphic if you have kids in the room. These towering beasts were far, far beyond intimidating. It is one thing to be threatened by someone much taller than you, but these creatures were not of the natural world. I recognized that they were entirely and purely evil and gazing at me with pure, unrestrained hatred, which completely paralyzed me with evil and terror that had stood before me. These creatures were insanely concentrated manifestation of evil and terror. I still had no idea where I was, and I felt utterly panicked. Although I had no point of reference or I wasn't familiar with anything I was experiencing and no understanding of how I got there, still I was faced with the unimaginable reality that torturous death seemed certain. The creatures weren't animals, they weren't humans. These were beasts that resembled a reptile in appearance, but took on the form of a human. Their arms and legs were not equally in length. They were out of proportion with no symmetry. The first one had bumps and scales all over its grotesque body. It had a huge protruding jaw. Look at how graphic this is. Gigantic teeth and large sunken-in eyes. This creature was stout and powerful with thick legs, abnormally large feet, and it was pacing violently in my prison cell. And this is when he woke up in hell. Like a caged bull, it was extremely ferocious. The second beast was taller and thinner, with very long arms. Razor sharp fins covered its body. Protruding from its hands were claws that were nearly a foot long. Its personality seemed different from the first creature. It was no less evil, but it remained rather still. I could hear the creatures speaking to each other, although I could not tell what language it was. Somehow I could understand their words. They were awful words, terrible, blasphemous language. Somehow I could understand their words, and they were blaspheming. Their mouths were expressing extreme hatred for God. Suddenly, they turned their attention toward me. They looked like hungry predators staring at their prey. I was terrified. Like an insect in a deadly spider's web, I felt hopeless, trapped, and frozen with fear, and I knew I had become, and I just get chills the whole time I'm reading this, the object of their hostility. And I felt a violent, evil presence, such as something I'd never felt or anything greater I could ever imagine. They possessed such a hatred that far surpassed any hatred a person could have, and this hatred was directed straight at me, he says. I couldn't identify what these beasts were yet, but I knew they were there to harm me. I wanted desperately to get up and run, but as I lay on that cell floor, I noticed I had absolutely no strength in my body. I could barely move. Why did I not have strength? I felt so defenseless. Psalms 88:4 says, I'm counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that has no strength. I knew that this was much more than a physical weakness I was feeling, but it was a weakness of every form. I was mentally and emotionally drained, even though I was only there for a couple minutes. Now think about 100 million years of this. Most of us have experienced a loss of strength or energy after intense weeping, emotional distress, or grief. After a time of healing, we get our strength back. It may even take years. However, in this moment, I knew that I would never recuperate from the literal weight that had fallen upon me, a weight of complete, now listen to this, hopeless despair. Two more creatures came into the cell. I had the feeling that these were the four that had been assigned to me. So now there's 4 creatures in his prison cell. He said, I felt as though I was being sized up and that my torment would be their amusement. As they entered, suddenly the light vanished, and this is graphic. It became absolutely pitch black in the cell. I had no idea why the sudden and intense darkness had begun, but I'd sensed that the light had been present, was an intrusion of the atmosphere, and now it's gone back to its normal state of darkness. Lamentations 3:6 says, he set me in dark places, like the dead long ago. One of the creatures, and this is graphic, one of the creatures picked me up. The strength of the beast was amazing. I was comparable to the weight of the glass in its hand. Mark 5:3-4 says, describes a demon-possessed man by having not been able to be bound, not even with chains. The chains had been pulled apart and the shackles broken to pieces. And then he says, instinctively, I knew that the creature holding me had the strength of approximately 1,000 times greater than a man. I cannot explain, he says, how I perceived that information, but these beasts began to throw me against the wall. I crumbled to the floor, and it felt as if every bone in my body was broken. I felt pain, but it was as if the pain was somehow being softened, and I wasn't experiencing the full brunt of the pain. I thought, how was this pain being blocked? The second beast, with the razor-like claws and protruding fins, grabbed me from behind in a bear hug as it pressed into my chest, its sharp razor fins through my back. I felt like a rag doll in its clutches in comparison to its enormous size, and then it reached around and plunged its claws into my chest and began to rip outward. My flesh hung from my body like ribbons as I fell to that cell floor. These creatures had no respect for the human body, how remarkable the body was made. I've always taken care of myself, Bill says, eating right, exercising, and staying in shape. None of this mattered in hell as my body was being literally destroyed right before my eyes. I knew that I would never be able to escape this torture via death, or that death was even an option. Death penetrated me, but death eluded me. The creatures seemed to derive pleasure in the pain and terror that they inflicted upon me. Psalms 116:3 says, the sorrows of death compassed me, and the pain of hell's gate held upon me. I found trouble and sorrow. Oh, how I yearned for death, but there was none. The living dead I pleaded for mercy, but they had no death, absolute no mercy. These creatures seem to be incapable of mercy. They were pure evil. And then it says, no mercy even existed in this place. Mercy is from God in heaven. The mental anguish I felt was indescribable. Asking for mercy for such evil only seemed to heighten their desire to torment me. I was conscious of the fact that there was no fluids in my body, no blood, no water, no nothing. At this time, I didn't stop to wonder why. I was extremely nauseous from the terrible smell coming from the creatures. It was disgusting, foul, rotten. It was by far the most putrid smell I've ever encountered. If you could take every rotten thing you can imagine, such as an open sewer, rotten meat, spoiled eggs, sour milk, dead rotting animals, sulfur, magnify that by 1,000 times, you may come close to it. This is not an exaggeration. He says, the odor was actually extremely toxic, and that alone should have killed me. Indistinctly, I just knew that some of these things I experienced were 1,000 times worse than I could ever possibly imagine. Such things as the odor mentioned, the strength of the demons, the loudness of the screaming, the dryness and the loneliness felt. This is the pure terror that I experienced in hell. And Bill Wiese goes on giving hundreds of verses in his book of 23 minutes he spent in hell. And this is a picture, guys, of somebody I know him personally. I trust him. Somebody that actually experienced hell and came back to share the message. This is the sheer, and I'm literally sweating. My palms are soaking wet right now because this is the literal sheer torment of hell. And this is why it's so serious that we warn our friends and family about the place. Now, I want to give you some other facts about hell that you might not know, that hell is a literal place in the center of the earth. Now, the deepest researchers have ever dug into the earth is 7.5 miles, and it took them over 20 years to dig that hole. The goal of the researchers I was reading was 9 miles, but it says that they said they experienced unexpected increased heat while digging. Temperatures that reached at 7 miles deep, the temperatures reached 350 degrees, which was double what they predicted at 7 miles. So think about this. The deepest anyone has ever dug in the earth is 7 miles. Yet scientists don't know for sure, but they believe that the earth is a minimum, the core of the earth is a minimum of 2,000 miles deep. And the deepest they've ever gone is 7.5 miles. So they estimate 2,000 to 3,000 miles deep. So the question is, if you're 7 miles into the earth and the temperatures, according to scientists, are 356 degrees, how hot is hell? Now, Bill Wiese in his book says that he felt like he was 3,700 miles deep into the earth. He said, I can't explain it. I just felt like I knew when I was there, that's how deep it was. But it makes it very clear that this is an extremely real place in the center of the earth. Now, the Bible says in Numbers 16, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed swallowed them up, and they went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed up upon them, and they perished among the congregation. 1 Samuel 28 says, I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth, and an old man is coming up. Why have you disturbed me, bringing me up? Psalm 63:9 says, but those who seek my life to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. Again, the Bible is showing us that hell is actually located in the lower parts of the earth. Isaiah 26:19 says, and the earth shall cast out the dead. Ezekiel 31 says, when I shall bring thee down and descend them into the pit, the people of the old time, and you shall descend into the lower parts of the earth and the places of desolate of old with them that go down to the pit, for they are delivered unto death to the nether part of the earth with them that go to the pit. So these are verse after verse describing hell is a literal place located in the center of the earth. Ezekiel 31:14 says, for they're all delivered to death, neither them parts of the earth, they go down into the pit of the earth. Matthew 12:40 says, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. This is your Bible. Ephesians 4:9 says, he who was Jesus also descended into the lowest parts of the earth. Hell is located, I believe, and a lot of people will teach us and preach us, this is a literal place. And this is what is even more detrimental and mind-blowing about hell, is that this is a literal place right now that we're standing on top. Now, you have to know this about hell. I'm just going to give you a bunch of different facts and descriptions about hell. Hell, it was created for Satan and his angels. So when God designed and created and manufactured hell, we don't know when God did it. It was not designed for people. Hell was not. So if you think about the torture, the torment, the darkness, the separation, the outer darkness, and the fire, none of this was meant for people. This was meant for the devil. Matthew 25:41 says, then he will also say to those on his left, depart from me, you accursed people, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. 2 Peter 2:4 says, God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but he cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, held for judgment. The everlasting fire of hell, write this down, was prepared for Satan and his angels, not humans. Now you might be thinking, how could hell be so bad? How could it be so much terror and so much destruction and torture? Because God did not originally design it for people to go there. So God's design was not for people to go. Hell is a place for people that reject God, that want nothing to do with God, that trample over the cross of Christ and do not have a personal relationship with God.